Hello, welcome to another amazing episode of Talking Sense. And as you guys know, this season, or I guess if you don't know, I'm telling you, this season is our Empowered CMO season. So the entire season, every episode, we are featuring Empowered CMOs. So these are women, B2B CMOs, board members, CEOs who are really changing the trajectory and the face of marketing, in my opinion. And so who better to have on Talking Sense than one of my dear friends and someone who I really look up to, Carilu Dietrich. Carilu, thank you so much for coming on today to Talking Sense. Carilu.
So happy to be here, Lat. Thanks for inviting me.
Let's get into it. Let's start off. Again, one of the best sessions I've ever witnessed, Boardroom Nirvana. What was the research you did? Let's kick it off with that. What was the research you did to come up with Boardroom Nirvana?
Great, thanks, Lat. So I was the head of advertising at Oracle, or awareness advertising, and we did a whole bunch of presentations for Larry for the board because I did the sex and sizzle, the movies, the sports marketing, the airports, the front page of the Wall Street Journal. So I worked on a bunch of board decks, and there was a process and a flow and an expectation. And then I went to Atlassian, and I was the head of marketing, ahead of the IPO, repositioned the company, had an amazing IPO, two CEOs, first time young in Australia, very democratic executive team, totally different style and approach for the board. And then I went to a Series C company that was like 15 to 20 million. And again, totally different style and expectations for the board. So I just felt a little schizophrenic. When I got ready for the board, if I used my Oracle hat, I was fastidious and worked for a long time and was ready ahead of time. And if I used my Atlassian hat, I was really colloquial and it was a conversation and it didn't really matter because in that instance, our board didn't even have significant voting rights. And if I used my classy hat, it was somewhere in between. So I went out and talked to dozens of CEOs, private equity, CMOs to try to figure out what the best practices were and what was universal that we could learn to make ourselves more effective.
You didn't just ask CMOs, you went and asked actual board members and investors. Like they're the ones on the receiving end of this. So I just thought the level of due diligence that you put into coming up with this was amazing. So with that backdrop, drum roll, what'd you find?
So the biggest thing I found was that board members generally want less information instead of more. So as a marketer in the seat, you know, I think so many of us want to justify our value and show them every aspect of what we have mastery over. And they want us to filter and tell them only the most salient points. And they're thinking on a different time horizon than they are as well. So many of the board members emphasized to me that they expect that the CMO should have their shit together for the next 6 months, like the pipeline, the programs. It's great to get updated. But at the board level, they're trying to think 1 to 5 years in advance. How do we accelerate growth? How do we enter new markets? How do we think about mergers and acquisitions? What do we know that competitors are doing that we should be getting ahead of? And so they're looking to the CMO to be on top of their numbers and to be delivering results. But the partnership they're looking for is a thought partner, a strategist, and someone who can be really brief about the details so we can very quickly get to the important conversations that they want to have.
I have heard you say that one of the things you found, and I think this is a pretty good aha, is that details make you look junior.
Yes, that was the most, and I use it all the time because I think it comes up even in one-on-ones with CMOs and their CEOs or heads of sales. Like too much detail can make you look junior because it looks like you're trying to justify it and you don't actually have the mastery. And in fact, the most extreme case, one like 4-time CEO and now venture capitalist I talked to said that he didn't like by the end, he didn't like to share almost any data with the board. He's like, I do my job, you do your job, stay out of my business, and I'll tell you when I want money, headcount, or advice. And that sounds so extreme. Many of us wouldn't use that. And I've gotten lots of great advice from board members over the years. But at the same time, sometimes if you provide too much detail, then they dig around in it. Like, some huge percentage, and I don't know, 80 or 90% of board members are more financially oriented. I think the stats are like only 4% of board members are marketers or something close to that. 2.9% are marketers. So you're not talking to marketers who are really going to help you optimize your marketing strategy. You're talking to business strategists who care about the financials and are usually really good at math and are going to like check and dig into your conversion rates or extra things that you share with them. When you really want to focus on, maybe total pipeline or new product traction or net dollar retention or net promoter score, the really core metrics. And the deeper and more detail you share about all the marketing, the more risk you run of getting into rat holes, which don't necessarily make your marketing better.
So Christina Blottis is a hysterical CMO and friend of mine. And one time she said, she goes, giving your board a ton of numbers is like throwing meat to a pack of wolves. Right? And that has stuck with me. It's like, yeah, just less is more. We're going to stick to the same 5 things every time. And because also so many metrics are hard to define. And so, like, you can also get yourself in a situation where you're even just trying to explain what the metric is. Right? So like just getting to a consistent basket of metrics, I think is really important because context, they want to see trends up, are you red or green, or how do you compare to last year or quarter over quarter?
Mm-hmm. And one of my greatest mentors, Glenn Kelman, who's the CEO of Redfin, he told me, Carilu, it's an open book test. I want just the most important things on the slide, but then I want you to say yes, no, a specific number, or I don't know and I'll get back to you. He's like, I don't want you to talk around it, but you can have as many dashboards as you want printed out and look, like if we ask you a question and you say one moment and you look up the number and you say 87%, it makes you look like you're really on top of it. But you don't need to jam all of that into the slide deck. And you don't need to report on it all the time. Like they don't need to see all the laundry. They just need to see what is most important for them to properly advise the company about how to grow faster. And
that was awesome advice, Carilu. I really took that to heart. And so now my prep process is an appendix where I've tried to anticipate all of the questions. And I just always have my little appendix. And even if they never ask, it feels really good to have it. But that has been, I just think that's such helpful advice. Like just keep it tucked away in your little book so you're ready. But you don't have to actually have 60 slides in your board.
And they don't want to read that many slides, right? If you think about preparing for a board meeting from a board member's perspective, if every executive gives 60 slides, it's hours and hours of reading. And so can you help digest what's most important for them to know? That's an act of maturity to be really simple, right? I mean, think about it in marketing terms. Like you could tell customers or prospects every single differentiator that is important about your company in 12 bullet points, but you really have to boil it down to 3 that they need to know to make a decision.
I love that. So the other thing in your session that I thought was great was you talked about, hey, don't set yourself up for failure. Like you gave some really good tips on just, a week out and prepping and letting your team know that this is what's going to happen. So maybe talk through some of those tips because again, I'm like playing by the Carilu playbook.
Well, one of the things that was funny in creating the presentation is exploring my own fears and doubts. And for me, there's like many stages of having confidence, but what's really important to the board is that one, you know what you're doing and you're doing it well, and two, that they can have confidence in you as the right leader to overcome the challenges that are ahead. Because you're never going to have it all buttoned up. It's never perfect. There's always something going wrong, and if they feel like you have the knowledge, grace, and emotional intelligence and strength to deal with it, that's the real partnership for the long term. And so for me, part of having confidence is being well prepared, right? Like, so I started thinking about board meetings a couple months in advance because sometimes I wanted projects to be done in advance and have the metrics so I could share them. You know, you don't want to be like, we're going through research and we're going to actually have the results next week, and then you show them some preliminary data and it's maybe misleading, or you're not confident in it, or you haven't, analyzed it sufficiently. You want to really line up your projects thinking that the board meeting are these inflection points of strategy conversations, and the more homework you can have done for that class period, the better prepared you'll be. The second is really thinking about it as part of your core job. And so I'd had this challenge before where I was trying to work on my board slides like nights and weekends because I was doing my job during the week by meeting with my team. And that also under prepared me for showing up the way I wanted and then having the confidence that I wanted. So I ended up teaming up with people on my team and giving someone on the team this huge opportunity to be part of something and have visibility into a more strategic aspect than their role normally allowed. And so by having them kind of own and work on the board deck ahead of time, it got me out of trying to jam it into nights and weekends and not do a great job. So I'd say what you're looking for is to have confidence in yourself, because that's what gives the board confidence in you. And so preparing accurately, doing great work is half the battle, and then getting yourself in the right mind state through that preparation, but also through some other things that we can discuss, is what really gives the board confidence in your ability to help grow the company.
Yeah, because the reality is they are judging. One of the things Nora Denzel said in her interview is, make no mistake. Like, when we do the closed door, we're talking about you. Like, we know they are. And so you do need to get yourself in the right state of mind to show up confidently, as you described, and the way you want to show up. So, preparation is absolutely key. So some good ideas there. I want to transition, Carilu, separate but related topic, which is the role of a CMO. And is it marketing? Is it market? Is it both? We've talked a lot about being a chief market officer versus a chief marketing officer. Like, what's your take on that?
So I think at each stage of growth in your career, you're trying to learn mastery of what you're doing, and then you're looking ahead to what's next. And so when you're a marketer, you might be learning about demand gen, and then you're looking ahead to what's next. Like, how do we get better content into the demand gen? So maybe you learn about product marketing, and you're like, how do we get more visibility to get more eyes on this messaging in this demand gen? And so maybe you're learning about brand and public relations. And as you're growing in your marketing career, you're learning about all of the different marketing functions. And that's what gets you to be the CMO, and you're pulling together those marketing functions. But when you get to the C-suite, then you need to be looking to the next stage. And the next stage is thinking like a CEO, and thinking like a board, and thinking like your investors, because those are your new customers. You still have the customers of your business that buy the software or product or widgets, but you have investors who give you the money to help you grow faster. And so thinking like a CEO includes thinking across the business as a whole. Like, exactly what are you selling? To whom are you selling it? How big is that market opportunity? How can you take more market share from other competitors or acquire more companies to bring in? And so as a marketer, your thought is like, how do you optimize what you have and grow it farther? And as a business investor, CEO, you think about, how can we accelerate the growth? How can we do even more? And so sophisticated CMOs are on their way to being CEOs, strategists, and board members. And you see that in a lot of career paths. But it's really important that we teach ourselves along the way, because that is more of a chief market officer that has a bigger role at the company, can make a bigger impact on the company and growth as a whole, and is a more strategic partner to the board and CEO.
One of the things you're passionate about, and I think it falls under being a chief market officer, is just understanding financials. Not just the pipeline, not the funnel. I'm not talking about the funnel. The funnel is a little bit table stakes. Would you not agree? It's understanding the overall financials. So maybe talk about some of the things that you've learned and that you've followed and find important as you're advising CEOs and also CMOs.
So I feel so blessed because my dad is an economist and an investor. And he's a lawyer. So I've been groomed to be an investor, lawyer, business person since I was a little kid. But one of the things that he's taught me is how to look at the world through the eyes of an economist and investor. And through my career, that's been really advantageous. So I've found that picking a company that has growth will grow your career faster than picking a company that doesn't have growth. And that maybe seems kind of obvious, but when I was younger, you're like, well, do I like the people? Do I like the topic? Is it close to my house? Do they, have people I want to be friends with, or like men I might want to marry? I don't know. There's millions of reasons people pick jobs. But if when I worked for Oracle, now it was like during difficult time of the 2008, but over this period of time, I had a huge budget. I had a reasonably sized team, but it didn't really grow or change. And I sometimes felt like people have to leave the company for me to move up. When I joined Atlassian, we grew 5x in the time that I was there. My team grew from 15 to 100. The responsibilities and opportunities I had were so significant. And as I look at the world, I look at the world through the eyes of growth. Like how can you find growth opportunities for yourself personally, for your company, for your team? And part of understanding the growth, there's two different parts to any great investment. One is is it a good company? And the second is is it appropriately priced? Is it already overpriced? Is it, did you miss the boat on kind of getting in at the right time? And so increasingly as a CMO, and certainly in evaluating what jobs you want to take or boards you want to take or investments you want to make, there's a number of core financial metrics that you need to understand that in our world that VCs are looking at, or in the public world that public market investors are looking at. And the more that a CMO can understand those, the more effective they can be at optimizing those to make the company really grow and their career grow. And the better they can converse with the leaders above them, because they're focused on the same core metrics, which aren't necessarily marketing metrics. Some of those ladder up, but that's not sufficient alone.
So you want to rattle off a few? I know we probably can't talk about all of them, but maybe what are a few that maybe a marketer wouldn't be
Well,
thinking
starting with the really obvious ones, I think when I was a junior marketer, I didn't really understand the total revenue of my company, and I didn't necessarily understand the profit, and I didn't necessarily understand the burn rate of I was lucky to join Atlassian, which was a profitable company. We made money and we spent money. It was very much like your own checking account. But a lot of high growth SaaS companies fundraise a lot of money. They have a lot of money and they're spending more than they're making. And when you're doing that, there's some point where you could run out of money and not pay your employees. And understanding the balance between really pushing growth and being thrifty enough to sustain through difficult times is important, whether you're a high growth SaaS startup or whether you are have a nonprofit, right? Nonprofits get grants and they get funding, and sometimes if their burn rate is too high, they can get out ahead of their ability to keep the nonprofit alive. So I think starting with those core, and then there's one of the chief partners at Redpoint does a number of presentations. Tomas, we'll have to put his full name and a link in the blog notes, but there's others like the net dollar retention. Like when you have a new customer, how much does that customer grow over the next couple of years? So Denise Pearson, who's the CMO of Snowflake, was just speaking on a conference this morning, and she said that the net dollar retention of Snowflake is 160%, which is like the huge high benchmark. Like we can all aspire to that, but understanding how sticky your product is, and if the two ways to get to a strong net dollar retention are either through keeping customers, like if customers turn over, then their revenue doesn't grow in the future, or through having customers that can buy more of your product or buy additional products from your company. And so understanding how you grow the revenue per customer over time is super important to marketing, and understanding how your company is doing relative to others is super important for benchmarking. So there's a number of different metrics that I think are core financial metrics that we should learn as marketers.
I feel we need to do a whole episode on this because I feel like we've rotated so far to sales. And to some degree, sales is a little overserved, I believe, sometimes for our marketing organizations. And just understanding all those underlying customer metrics and the importance of marketing partnering with the chief customer officer, I think is an area that's really important to taking that next stage, and you talked about for growth.
Well, and absolutely, like back to our chief market officer conversation. If you're the marketer and you're only talking about marketing, you have this kind of limited scope. If you're coming into the boardroom and you're saying, and this, on the blog I wrote about 5 steps to Boardroom Nirvana, which is on my LinkedIn profile. There's like a recommendation of slides, and the first slide is to talk about the market, to talk about what's gone on in the competitive set, like what trends are we seeing, and part of this is thinking about like your total addressable market, or creating your category. Are you in an existing category? Are you expanding the category? Are you naming a new category? And the chief marketing officer has unique information. Like we talk to press, which gives us feedback. We talk to analysts who give us feedback. We generally have competitive tracking through product marketing or competitive group, which gives us insights. We might do win-loss reports on sales, so we kind of have shared customer insights there. And then, we have product strategists and market strategists in our product marketing. And so if we can bring that information to the table and we can really help think bigger, like big moves that will create step change instead of like incremental optimization of our email list that we might already like the people that we already know, that's where, we get the real value. And in order to do that, you have to know which metrics and which core levers those are. Like, I do think I've been part of setting up and rolling out Net Promoter Score at a number of different companies. And I'm really close friends with this Net Promoter Score genius because I think that even though it doesn't directly affect marketing, by understanding the customers, prioritizing the issues, and then getting the whole executive team aligned, then we can like build the right things in engineering that make customers happy, which makes them promote our products, which makes marketing and sales easier, which helps us get more pipeline and more revenue and more net dollar retention. So, the flywheel starts when you're thinking about the right customer the right product for the right customer. And the right delivery methods to get that to them.
So these are all awesome concepts, and I think all things that fall under thinking of yourself as a chief market officer. What I want to ask is, to some degree, I think the $1 million question here, which is our market ready for a chief market officer?
I think there's already chief market officers. I think what we're trying to say with chief market officer is to designate this leap forward in being more strategic. But there's a number of, and you and I know some folks that have changed their title to Chief Market Officer. I think you too, right? Aren't you a Chief Market Officer? Yes.
Oh yeah.
And but I think it's part of an evolution of being more strategic. You and I also know a number of marketers who have become CEOs, and becoming a chief market officer is the step
Is a
to a
baby step.
CEO.
Yeah.
So there's a counterpoint to be made, which is like chief market officer is just a really strategic, experienced chief marketing officer. But it's also helpful to think about the name and using the words to help marketers challenge themselves to think of themselves as that. I look back on my
Well,
career, and there were times when I was like, well, I don't want to be a CEO. I'm just going to like learn everything there is to know about marketing. And I think I was like narrow-minded in a way that made me, possibly less successful as a marketer, because I wasn't thinking of myself as a chief market officer, or someone on the path to a chief strategy officer, or someone on the path to a CEO, or someone on the path to a board member or an advisor. And now that I'm here on the other side and I'm advising and I'm a board member, I'm like, oh gosh, I wish I'd learned all those things earlier and challenged myself to think more like an investor, board member, or CEO.
Okay, so you're advising CMOs all the time. What are we doing to get in our own way of becoming a chief market officer? What are those? Because, it's so funny I always think it's so much easier to see other people's patterns and be like, why are they doing that? That makes no sense. But then I always wonder, what are people looking at me and being like, why does every day she does that? It makes no sense. Like
Right.
it's so much easier to see it when it's like someone else. And you get to see it across like so many CMOs. So what are we just every single day waking up and like minimizing ourselves?
Right. So just a little bit of context, because I think it helps. So I was at Atlassian. I grew my team to 100. It was hard, like being part of hypergrowth, like, and no one's doing it the same way as you are. And when I was younger, my network of other like phenomenal CMOs was lesser. And after my last CMO role with a social impact company, I decided I was going to be a CMO coach, because I wanted to kind of help people through some of the things I felt like I'd struggled with. And so I spent a year being a CMO coach. And what I identified was there are some obstacles that CMOs have that they're like trying to figure things out. But for a number of the CMOs that I was advising, it's just as much about the ecosystem around them that defines their success as their own strengths and weaknesses. And so the most common issue I see is that there's a company strategy problem. And it comes to a head in the CMO's world because they're the part that meets with the outside world. So, if your product is not sufficiently differentiated and you can't get traction selling it, and the CMO is like, oh, I must be bad at demand gen. And I come in and I say, I don't really feel like you have an ideal customer profile. Like, you guys are trying to like spray fire the whole market, or you, CMO, are trying to message something that's just not really there from the engineering side or the product side or the vision side. And so I've moved from coaching CMOs to doing more advisory work with CEOs and executive teams, because I find that my experience is more impactful in helping, like in the strategy discussions. So I end up leading a bunch of like strategy offsites and OKR planning for the year. So we can say, like, does the strategy as a whole really fit? Are we really confident that this has traction? And then each person can do their job. And then I can help the CMO be successful because they're not just trying to put lipstick on a pig. There's only so much that can be done with marketing. And I'll tell you that by and large, I think a lot of CMOs are working really hard and they're doing great work. But the biggest challenge that they have after the ecosystem is that there's so much day-to-day slog that they can't find the time to be strategic. And that they know they want to do it, but they can't get there. And they're frustrated and they're overworked and they're like strung out, not seeing their families enough. And yet it just feels like so much.
Right. So it's like, how do we put more boundaries around how we manage our time? And it's interesting
And
in the
mhm.
Empowered CMO survey, last year's survey, we asked how people spent their time. And we found that CMOs were spending a lot of time doing their own projects and with their team, and not the amount of time that they wanted to spend with the market and boards and even their peers. So I just think that that's probably a little data to support your data, which is like they're just in it, slogging it out, and it's really hard to like, when you're treading water, it's hard to think about, I'm going to go swim to that buoy, right?
Totally. It is. And so the only coping mechanism that I have seen for that and with that is hiring amazing direct reports. So, when I was at Atlassian, I was so supported by the CEOs who said, like, we want to hire 4X leaders. Like, today they're going to have one person, in 1 year they're going to have two, then they're going to have four. Like, within 2 years, they need to be 4X the leader at all sorts of levels. And now we were in this, amazing hyper growth. But I do think when you're hiring someone, to the degree that you can hire the person who should almost replace you, that it's terrifying because they actually could replace you. And sometimes that happens. Like, revenues turn back and they just need an execution leader, and the lower paid execution leader could run it. But if you're part of growth and you get someone who can really execute almost at your level or maybe even better, that frees you up to do the more strategic work that you're not even touching right now that can make the whole team better, right? Like, if you figure out how to enter a new category, or you figure out a big new M&A strategy that's going to like transform the company's category, like, that's not something your directs can do. But if you can hire someone to do what you're doing with your directs, that's something that you could do that could really change the whole trajectory of the company.
It's so interesting because one of the things you learn as a sales leader is, your number is literally a roll up of your team. And so you want to get the very best, biggest, baddest AE you can, that's a better AE than you are and can sell. Like, it's kind of ingrained. But I think it's easy as a marketer to think, oh, I'll just train some people up and maybe I'll save budget, and there's always the pressure of headcount versus programs. But I totally agree. I think one of the things that's helped me along the way is I've always hired people way better than me, way more experienced, that just run circles around me. So I think that's some of what it takes.
And I've always been intimidated by those people because you're like, why would they want to work for me? But if you can set a vision and you can bring people together and you can get those people the budget and headcount, like, I think about back, there's this woman who's like one of the best people I've ever worked with. Her name's Heather Staples. She was the head of comms at Atlassian that I hired, and she's the head of comms at Plaid right now. And she was so great that I would be, we'd have one-on-ones, and I'd be like, tell me what's happening. Like, are there any obstacles? Do you need any budget? Do you need any headcount? Like, can I remove anything for you? Great, go. And then she would get these fantastic results. Our IPO press was out of this world. And she could trust me to navigate the organization and to get her what she needed to be successful, and to give her the flexibility she needed to have the life that she wanted, to spend certain times with her kids, or, we had this like mutual respect. And I felt like that relationship helped me see how I could be a good leader to exceptional achievers, which I think is the like secret to so many of these great, all sorts of C-suite, CEOs, CMOs, CFOs, is just having a phenomenal team that they trust, that gets great work done, and with very little friction.
Love it. Love it. Well, this was an awesome first part. I want to transition to one of my favorite parts of the show, which is talking nonsense. And so, what do you call BS on? Like, what are you like, this drives me crazy, fingernails on a chalkboard? Why do people talk about this? This is ridiculous. Buzzword that drives you nuts.
Well, I'm going to go in a different direction, which I think is self-doubt from amazing people. I talk to some super amazing people and they still feel like they're not good enough, or they're not doing enough, or they've like really messed something up. And again, this is one that I think, it's easier to pick on others, and I should have all of my friends call me up and be like, you're good enough, you're doing great, just keep
Right.
it up.
Right.
But I really struggle with, and often it's women who just can't see as much in themselves as the world sees in themselves. And I think that's for me like nails on chalkboard, because they're doing so amazing and yet they can't enjoy the ride because of what's in their own head.
I often wonder, is that in your own head, self-doubt, need for perfection, part of what's made a lot, like, does that make the
Does that
success?
drive us? Is that our success metric too?
Well, is it sort of part, like, it's weird, right? Because at the same time, it's like, no, that sucks. Like, why should you feel like every time your CEO calls you, you're getting fired? Like, that's terrible. That's a horrible way to live. But that's the way a lot of us live. So, like, why is that? But at the same time, is that little bit of crazy what? I don't know. I don't know. This
I
could
know
be a whole episode.
I struggle with this exactly, and I'll tell you, I struggle with it as a parent. My parents um, had like difficult childhoods, and they felt like fantastic careers and making money and getting respect was the way to like personal freedom and opportunity. And so, my parents were really tough on me. We worked really hard on school. In fact, I have little kids. They're 9 and 11. And they're frustrated that they have to write rough drafts and final drafts of their essays. And I was like, my parents made me do 3 rough drafts. Like my mom edited it, my dad edited it, and my mom edited it again. Then I could turn it in. And they were
Yeah.
lawyers and English teachers. Like it was like hard editing. Anyway, right, yeah, like all of the intensity that we have from our children, from our families, from our environments, from whatever it is, has helped lead us to success. And yet I just and again I'm not great at this myself, but I know so many wonderful people who I just wish could enjoy the ride. Like I wish we could be better. Like I wish we could enjoy what we've done and feel good and still challenge ourselves to be better. And I think both of those could exist. And actually, if there's a new Nirvana presentation from Carilu Dietrich, it's probably about something like that, because true Nirvana would be like acceptance of the present moment and confidence in yourself to handle what comes next, and yet like excitement and enthusiasm to like do the hard work and do what's next, but with like a beginner's mind and an open mind, because all of the self-doubt and anxiety actually gets in our way of doing better work, and we all know that, but it's hard to change.
So I think we're going to pencil you in for the next Empowered retreat. I think that session we're going to put on the agenda because I love it.
And you know
And
what?
let's wrap up with like a little bit about you. You've got serious chops with all the experience you've talked about. What's some things that you think have helped you along the way?
So I was just, it kind of relates to the last conversation, but Kate Bullis, also another fantastic part of the Empowered organization, had told me energy is your greatest asset. And it's funny because, I've always thought of like my work ethic being my greatest asset, or maybe my money being my greatest asset, right? Like things that I was focused on. But really, I do think it's your energy that's your greatest asset. I've been working on like being healthier and more passionate about what I'm doing. So like really trying to focus my energy on projects that give me energy and spend time connecting with people that give me energy. And I feel like it, with opportunity and hard work, like one thing leads to the other. So I'm super excited about connecting phenomenal people to each other. And I get to do a lot of that right now in my advisory work with different high growth startups.
Well, I know you've done that a ton for me, and I am eternally grateful. So you live it. You live that cycle of energy and connection every day. I feel it as getting to be a part of your network. So we can't end a talking sense without one last question. You learn more from your mistakes. So just colossal F up. Like, ah! The worst.
Right. You asked me about this question, and it's funny because there's not one thing, right? Like there's all sorts of mistakes that litter our career.
Yeah, I'm
And
kind of like, well, can I tell you about yesterday?
right? Fortunately, it was not marrying my husband. You know, it was the regret is not marrying my husband, who's awesome, or having children, which have added so much joy to my life, or like
Right.
taking care of my my mom died a number of years ago, and she was sick for a number of years, and I'm so happy that I invested the time, even with my crazy jobs, in being there for my mom and aunts at the end of their life. But I don't know. Like the first thing that came to my mind was like one time when we spent a ton of money at Oracle on something that like didn't work, right? Like $400,000. And I called my sister and I was like, "Oh my God, I spent all this money on something that didn't work, like $400,000." And she works for Target as she was doing merchandising at the time where they pick what goes in the Target stores. And she was like, "Oh, I made a mistake once on a spreadsheet and it like was more than $400,000." And I went into my boss's office and I was like crying. And she's like, "Oh, it's hard for everyone the first time they lose $1 million. Don't worry, you'll get over it." Because like when you're dealing with scale,
Yes.
like
Yeah.
when you're dealing with scale, the mistakes are bigger, right? And so I think that's the hardest part about having a bigger job is like sending an email to the wrong list was like a panic attack when I was a demand gen person. And then like losing hundreds of thousands of dollars on like an inefficient program at Oracle was a really big problem. And then, I don't know, hiring the wrong people or, like not investing in a relationship that was really important and like being focused on the metrics and not the relationship that comes out of it. There's all of these mistakes. And so I think if anything, just trying to accept not being a perfectionist and accepting the mistakes as what shapes us to be better next time is what I try to keep focused on. And I try to just forget all those mistakes and
Yeah.
move on.
My mom once told me I had obviously made a mistake and, came to her and what should I do? And she said, making a mistake is not a big deal. Dealing with it is the big deal. And how you deal with it is like a measure of you. So use this as an opportunity. Like how you fix something says way more about you than the mistakes you make. And I was like, okay, that's really smart. So I always
You
think
gotta love moms.
when I'm like in the mistake mode, I'm like, okay, how am I going to fix this? Like, how are we going to come out better?
And there's a Buddhist saying that the world shoots the first arrow into you and then you shoot the second arrow into yourself. Because it's just like your mom said, like the mistake is the first arrow. Something happens that was bad, but then what comes next? Like I'm so stupid or like quitting your job or all the things you could do that could be extreme after is the second arrow that you control. And so the mindfulness of being present and like accepting the mistake and thinking about the next right action, is part of the Buddhist way Buddhist or Tao that I really like try to stay focused on.
Oh my gosh. Well, I love it. Carilu, we covered a lot of ground. Boardroom Nirvana, Chief Market Officer, thinking like an investor, like such valuable gems for people to listen to and understand. Then we went into mindfulness and how we accept ourselves and deal with our mistakes and have confidence. So this was probably one of the more meaty talking senses, and I think we got 4 or 5 coming out of it. Thank you so much for coming on the show, and thank you for being just a meaningful part of my life. I feel very, very blessed to have you in my tribe.
Oh, thanks, Latané. And I just can't thank you enough. I think your like energy and positivity and laughter and fun just adds so much inspiration to me. And you had once said in a work context, like, how do we make this more fun? And I thought, oh my gosh, I've never ever asked myself that question. And I should. That is a great leadership quality. So I love the yin and yang of our two sides that come together when we get to connect. So thank you for that.
Absolutely, absolutely. More cowbell all the time.
More cowbell.
More cowbell. All right. Well, I will see you next time. And that's a wrap.
Thanks.